Welcome to the third Red Sea Dialogue webinar series that we launched a couple of months ago. And thank you all for joining us, especially to our speakers who are also at the same time contributors to the ebook we published on the topic, the Red Sea divided by water and united by opportunities. The focus of this webinar, following the previous ones, is the first one, a launch of the ebook in Nairobi in April, and last month's webinar on the implications of the war in the Middle East. This third one is going to look further ahead, not only on the content of the ebook or the speaker's contribution to the ebook, not only the implications of the war in the Middle East to the Red Sea, both sides of the Red Sea, but also further ahead after the war, as you have seen it in the title. So it's a bit talking about post-war period, if there will be one to talk of. We'll see. We are also, I think, here, the speakers are requested to apply a degree of foresight, a bit of scenario projections, trajectories. As the saying goes, the best predictor of the future is the past. The past history is the best predictor. And at the same time, there are new developments, new dimensions that will affect the future. So our speakers will bring that into account. If you have seen some of the publications recently by the African Development Bank, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Union, and UNDP, they look at both the current impact, but rightly so, about the impact in the long term, 3 months and above. And it's very important to keep these two planes that are distinct to an extent, but connected also. The temporal planes, the ongoing impact that we know we have been following, the surge in oil and gas prices, disruption of fertilizer supplies, supply chains in general, interference with the freedom of navigation, and its knock effect on aviation, tourism, labor migration, all those things, hospitality sectors. Now, there are even more important questions than this, and I will raise some of them for our consideration as we discuss. The first one is, how will Iran emerge from the war? What are the implications for the proxy dynamics in Yemen and Horn of Africa? Will the Middle Eastern and GCC states and Iran continue to support their proxies in different parts of the world, especially on Horn of Africa, Yemen, and beyond? Or will they be constrained politically, militarily, and economically, both internal introspection, policy changes, or even economically and militarily? And the second one is, how will this conflict reshape the economies of the Middle Eastern countries, especially the GCC states? And what are the downstream consequences for their engagement in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden? And the third, what are the likely future dynamics with Middle Eastern and GCC states? The future dynamics internally between themselves. Will the war produce greater cohesion among themselves, deepen existing fractures, or will it increase these fault lines that we have seen that led to war and competition among them? The fourth one is, how will the war reconfigure relationship between GCC states themselves internally, or GCC states with the US, between GCC states, but also GCC states with Israel, and GCC states with Iran? generally speaking, within the Middle Eastern relationship. After war, relationships do not remain the same. Many changes come with war. That has been one historical predictor of the future, is that history shows after war, many changes do come. And then beyond that, what will be the influence with individual Middle Eastern and GCC states, for example, Turkey, which will be the topic of our next webinar in July. How will it affect the relationship with Africa, but also beyond in the Middle East and beyond? And the good thing is, and I'm fortunate, I will not be forced to answer these questions, these difficult, hard questions, with related dilemmas to answer them will be instead left to the speakers, four able speakers. I hope all of them are with us. We'll see if Mahjoub Zawari is here with us. He is non-resident senior fellow at the Middle Eastern Council on Global Affairs, and he previously served as professor of contemporary Middle East politics with a focus on Gulf region and Iran. And he was the director of Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. His contribution to the ebook that we are based on our discussion is Bridging or Breaking Horn of Africa and Gulf States Ideological Divisions, and the Security of Red Sea. We have also Ahmed Morsi. He's an associate senior researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, in Sweden, and formerly a visiting fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Middle Eastern Council on Global Affairs in Qatar, I think, and where he focused on interconnected dynamics across Middle East and Africa. His contribution in the ebook is titled Balancing the Red Sea, Egypt's Strategy in a Very Crowded Field. I have added very deliberately, but the title is Egypt's Strategy in a Crowded Field. We have also Luigi Narboni, a vice president of Mediterranean Platform and a professor at Luis University in Rome. He formerly served as EU ambassador to Saudi Arabia with non-resident status, EU ambassador status to Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. His contribution with a colleague, Carlo, was on Beneath the Surface, a shared but unequal maritime space. We have also the most important contributor here, Asma Mohammed Ahmed, is a credit manager at Exim Bank, Djibouti. Her contribution to the ebook is entitled Two Shores, One Shared Prosperity, Opportunity, Development, and Security. And we have, I hope, all of them with us today. What we'll do now is to focus on this order. The first round will be initial thoughts, intervention points that will listen from our ebook contributors and observers of the region. And then we will have questions that will be those of you who are participating. If you have any question, comment, please do add it on the chat room. Colleagues will be managing. We have two colleagues that will be managing, and at the same time, I will look at those questions, and we'll have a second round of engagement with the speakers on various topics, and you're free to raise questions to any of them. Now, I would like to start with Mahjoub, if he's around. I don't know whether he's around. If he's not, let's go straight to Ahmed Morsi. Ahmed, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mihari. Thank you to all the organizers, the Pan-Africa Agenda, the Mediterranean Platform, and good to be with you. And it's a good opportunity to talk about topics that are not only about just war and conflict themselves, but also the consequences that come out of them. And I think in your introduction, it was very clear how almost 3 months after the start of this war by the United States and Israel on Iran, and the retaliations by the Iranian regime and military towards the Gulf and beyond, how things are unfolding in a way that looks less comfortable or confident as the United States government and the President of the United States thought things will be. Let me just quickly reflect on some of these questions that you mentioned with regards to how some of these countries will look like after the war, or how can we think, or what are we thinking about as we are reading into these developments. And I think it's only appropriate to think about some of these countries as standalone, in the sense that there are domestic level changes that will happen, whether it's politically or socially or economically. And then thinking collectively in terms of the region, whether it's within the GCC member states or the Gulf at large, including Iran, even up to the Levant area, where it's also very much entangled with Lebanon, with Iraq, and all the way down to Yemen. And then I think across the Red Sea, and I'd like to think of it more collectively as East Africa from the north to the south, whether it's Egypt in the north or Somalia to the south, those countries that have shores on the Red Sea. But also, of course, we know that the consequences do not stop at countries at the shore. There will be other consequences that goes into inland to countries that are not necessarily part of the Red Sea basin, but are also impacted by it, whether it's Ethiopia, it's Kenya, or others. And I think just to bring to everyone's attention, while we're actually talking about the consequences of the war or what could happen in the next months, we're seeing the Ebola virus kind of expanding from where it started into other countries. And as we know, and as all of us have experienced not too far or too long ago with COVID, these things cannot be stopped at a border or a checkpoint or anything. So I think we should be also concerned and alarmed at how something that is more viral and less, caught by weapons or other individual capacities might actually have graver consequences, particularly in the age of AI and technology and misinformation as we are living through. So quickly, let's think about what kind of Iran that could emerge from this war and what kind of implications for its proxy dynamics in Yemen or elsewhere. I think, unfortunately, Mahjoub is not here. I wish he is, and he could have given us some of his reflections. But I think Iran will come out of this war, or at least as we're seeing it so far, domestically intact in terms of the regime to some extent. But I think regionally fractured or weakened. I believe that one of the reasons why there is a delay in reaching some sort of an agreement with the United States at the moment is that there is this fear that any such agreement will empower, or at least this fear is coming from the West, or particularly the United States and Israel, of course, is that any agreement, particularly that if it means removing some sanctions or releasing some financial or assets to Iran, will mean like it's an outright win for the Iranians on some level. This is how some of the leaders in the United States are thinking, and some of the Trump administration officials are considering in terms of when and why and how this will play out. Iran, as I said, is going to be weakened regionally. I think this is not just a consequence of this particular war that started last February, but I think in the last 3 years we have been seeing a weakening, I would say, Iranian influence across the Gulf and the Levant, from the fall of the Assad regime to the very, very much the genocide in Palestine or in Gaza that weakened Hamas, which have had some relationship to the Iranian regimes previously, to even the Houthis. And we have seen that the Houthis even did not intervene as people expected or observers expected to send, rockets towards Israel or against U.S. Bases as much as people thought, which I think shows to some extent that there is some sort of restraining, but also the fear of opening new grounds that nobody can really control. But to quickly wrap this point up, I believe the Iranians are not going to let go of the groups that they support in Iraq, Lebanon, or Yemen easily. I think these are the three remaining kind of big established groups: the Houthis, Hezbollah, and a collection of militias in Iraq. We cannot just say it's only one. And I think these will be part of a bargaining process with the United States, with some Gulf countries, if we move beyond the immediate kind of fragile ceasefire that we're experiencing. At the end of the day, I think it's clear, at least in the Hezbollah case and Lebanon, that the Iranians have been very explicit about a ceasefire that involves both sides, Iran and Lebanon. And I think that's something that at the beginning we have seen the Americans sign up to, and the Israelis once the first ceasefire happened, and then the Israelis continued beyond that. And I think this will be a critical kind of component in how we think of Iran post this war, particularly to what extent it will continue to use some of the proxies or some of the organizations that it have helped create and prop up. That's briefly and quickly about Iran. Let me just also briefly talk about the Gulf states, and I'm sure Luigi can add a lot more to that from his experience. But I think this war, particularly that the Gulf states did not sign up to and did not really ask for, have engulfed them in ways that they didn't expect. And in period of time, in longer period of time that they also didn't expect, that they will have to continue to defend and ask for help and support from different partners and different parties. This war also exposed something very important and critical, that despite the American presence in the Gulf, the Americans are not necessarily primarily focusing on defending the Gulf countries. They have definitely been defending their own troops and their own naval presence, and of course Israel. But the Gulf states come second or third to that, depending on the situation. And we actually have seen even the data that has been reported by different news outlets or institutions like IISS in Bahrain and London about the number of rockets, the number of missiles, and the number of drones that have been launched by Iran, whether it's from Iranian territory or from Iraq or elsewhere against the Gulf, have in some respects have been more than what have been actually directed at Israel, which shows that this whole dynamic of the war have been to inflict or at least create some sort of chaos and fear within the Gulf states that have for decades built a setup that prioritized safety and security and a safe haven even for financial for finances that all of a sudden have become under attack. The Gulf states will have to rethink some of their priorities in the medium term, and these priorities will include defense, so defense and armament spending, whether they will double down on certain types of armament or they will diversify and embrace a more agile technology, particularly with drones and defensive drones, as we have seen with Ukraine. The other element is an economic model that's a little bit more different, maybe. And we actually have started seeing some challenges in terms of keeping some of the workforce in the Gulf. And maybe this will change after the summer. As you know, the summer and the heat pushes a lot of people to try and kind of leave for vacation or at least work from elsewhere. But it will be interesting to see how the economy, the economic structures, and the modality of the Gulf will pan out in the short and medium term. To what extent there will be doubling down on using the money that comes out of the energy, hydrocarbons particularly, to diversify elsewhere, and to what extent the crisis and the closure of the Hormuz Strait will make them think a little bit different about how to transport their oil and gas, maybe through the Red Sea or through the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea south of Oman, which means investing in infrastructures that doesn't exist at the moment, including all the old projects like the railway system that connects the Gulf or other infrastructures that would help ease mobility, trade, and movement. I'll stop here, and then I'm sure there will be other rounds, and we can talk more about the other parties to this conflict, and of course, the other side of the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I think that gives us a very good point to start with. Luigi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mehari. I think Ahmed has spoken at length about Iran. I would tend to agree that Iran is clearly, for the moment, emerging as victorious from this war, having been able to withstand the attack of the largest military power in the world for such a long time. We having shown that its military capabilities, missiles and drones, continue to be effective in provoking damage, but above all, having acquired a new card, a new leverage in geopolitical standing in the region, which is the control of the Strait of Hormuz. We haven't talked about this, but I think this is clearly the novelty that has emerged. There's an impact also for the other waterway, which is the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And it shows, I think, with clarity, something that we already seen over the past 2.5 years through Houthis attacks in the Red Sea, i.e. that in a choke point, it's easily a choke point can easily become a very vulnerable military and commercial area, and it doesn't take much from asymmetric military action, being a drone or a missile hitting a commercial vessel is sufficient to create panic, increase insurance cost, and obviously scare the shipping companies that are particularly very prudent and very cautious about this type of risk, geopolitical risks. So even if the deal will manage to find a solution to the closure and the control that Iran has imposed on the Strait of Hormuz, I think we have now set a precedent that is likely to stay, and it's clearly something that Iran will continue to use both in Hormuz and possibly also in Bab el-Mandeb. So that is one point. We have an Iran that is clearly getting increasingly emboldened by the relatively military success, even though has had a lot of damage to its military capacity as well as to its economy. So whether the support to the proxies will continue in the ways that we have seen in the past decades is possibly unlikely. Although, I mean, there are political signals. I think Iran has clearly signaled that continues to support Hezbollah in Lebanon, that it sees the ceasefire as a continuum, not just applicable to the Persian Gulf. So that clearly hints towards a continued political support to its network of proxies in the region, that were part of its deterrent in the past. Now, moving to the Gulf, I think obviously this has been the major game changer for a number of reasons. First, on the security domain, I think is clearly finally given the clear indication that continuing to bet on American security umbrella and is probably not what should be done in the future. The US has not been able to deliver immunity from military action, which is something that the Gulf countries thought would be possible. There are quite a lot of people in the Gulf that are thinking that actually the US has gone ahead with the war that they clearly didn't want, and that has provoked quite a number of damage. Partly it's also due to the fact that there is a military presence through a number of bases throughout the Gulf. So whether this is a factor of protection or a factor of instability and insecurity, I think it will be up for discussion in the next months. I think obviously the Gulf countries are not going to give away with a strong relationship with the US, but it's very likely that they will continue and probably will double down on policy of diversification of their security postures. We have already seen some of the signs, the emergence of a much stronger Saudi Pakistani security agreement that may also encompass the nuclear umbrella. There is information, there is an alliance between Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Pakistan, that it's possibly not going to take the form of a mutual protection treaty. However, it indicates that there is a search from the part of particularly of Saudi Arabia of alternatives, of diversification, of ways of hedging and create more protection and security framework that it's broader than what existed so far. And that is likely to continue with something that perhaps we should discuss also. It's whether the diplomatic path may also bring about some different frameworks in the region, because we are continuing to discuss as if the different threat perceptions continue unabated the way they've been over the past 20 years. But there is also a diplomatic path that could be emerging from the region. I think it's probably the path that should be explored with some degree of commitment from all parties. The other important issue is the economy. I mean, obviously, the Gulf countries have believed that they would be immune from the chaos and the instability and the insecurity of the broader Middle Eastern region, and that is being proven false. The Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula is not a sanctuary. It gets impacted by the same dynamics of insecurity that affect other countries. That is an impact, as Ahmed was saying, for the economic model. I mean, what will be the impact on the investment climate? How much investors will continue to be willing to pour money into the visions that these countries have been trying to pursue and how much the impact on FDIs or even on the expatriate workforce at different levels, from the management to the workers. I mean, these countries cannot do without, in spite of now years of attempts to Saudifying, Emiratizing the economies, the presence of foreign workforce remains fundamental. So that has an impact on the economic model. There are other, they have been able and they've shown capacity to withstand the shock. Obviously, they have enough financial leverage. They can mobilize a sovereign wealth fund, and they've been doing this. However, if one looks at the very interesting example of Kuwait after the invasion of Iraq, of Saddam Hussein, it took several years for Kuwait to go back to normal, and the economic impact of reconstruction and rehabilitation of the infrastructure will be possibly very, very dire and higher than in the past. The question also remains what different economic model could emerge. I mean, Ahmed mentioned perhaps an attempt, there will be a reflection on whether these countries should double down on the domestic military production, for instance, where this production is going to be located. This is something that manufacturing is very difficult to bring about in Gulf countries. Perhaps this provides a new opportunity for economic integration with the Horn of Africa, with the localization of industry there. That is the final point I like to make. The Red Sea as an important waterway is likely to continue to increase in its importance for many reasons. One is the diversification of trade routes. I think the concept of choke points teaches that you can only try to mitigate the type of vulnerabilities that they produce if you have multiple alternatives. And so the emergence of various projects, the fact that now there is clearly talking about intensifying the east-west pipeline to use the port of Yanbu for oil export, even more than has been used so far, to create new avenues for trade via Aqaba, Jordan, Syria. They are all potential plans that are aiming at reducing the risk and the vulnerability of produced by choke points that is likely to remain even after the war and even after a potential deal. So that is something that will likely change the configuration, the economic dynamics, as probably the need to ensure freedom of navigation and more maritime security. That is clearly in the interest of all countries, all riparian countries in the Red Sea, for instance, and that is going to be a priority that can only be tackled successfully through increased cooperation between all stakeholders involved. I stop here, and perhaps there will be more opportunities to discuss other points.
Thank you so much, Luigi. Very, very helpful points that will help us even to interrogate some of the questions that you raised and some of the points you raised, including on broadly speaking, on the freedom of navigation and how that is impacted and choke points emanating from geography as asymmetry of power, manifesting asymmetry of power easily against hyperpower like the USA. Mahjoub had joined us. Welcome. First, I will give to Asma the opportunity to follow up, and then I'll come back to you for your initial intervention of 7 minutes or so. Asma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Mihari. Thank you for the opportunity, and my apologies for the camera because I'm currently in transit, so that's why I cannot open the camera. So I had time to reflect on the very question the webinar is asking, which is, are we going to see more competition, or are we going to see more collective endeavors, collective security? And I was thinking maybe we will see a bit more of both, because we may see more militarization and more securitization, for example, as demonstrated by the UAE, and the fact that it just left the OPEC, the weakening of multilateralism in the region, or maybe more scramble towards strategic regions such as the coast of the Horn of Africa. But also I was thinking we might also see a surge in coordination and cooperation, because a stable maritime system is in everyone's involved best interest. So I would like to say collective security is also a driver for Gulf countries, as recently demonstrated by the Iran retaliation that has used it and is still using it as collaterals in its war against the US and Israel. So I believe a coordinated response to mitigate and negotiate the region out of conflict is necessary. So I have 3 short points that I would like to make. And the first one is one that has come up a lot in the ebook. The Horn of Africa cannot be separated from Gulf security dynamics. I would like to stay. Sorry. The first point I would like to make is that the stakeholders in the Red Sea area and the Horn of Africa are not just observing the events that are happening in the Gulf and the conflict from a distance, because the 2 regions are interconnected economically, politically, and strategically, as we have been discussing so far. And the war and the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz illustrate this clearly now. Even if there is no full closure and we have ceasefire and then war again, and just the uncertainty alone has consequences. As Professor Mihari has mentioned, we are already seeing the shipping costs that have risen, insurance premiums for freight increased, supply chains are less and less predictable also. And for Djibouti, for example, whose economy depends heavily on imports, port logistics, maritime trade, these developments matter even more. Because Djibouti, of course, is in a very vulnerable position, which is also its main strength, the interests of Bab el-Mandeb. So more broadly, many countries in the Horn remain vulnerable to fluctuation in all these costs rising and all this fluctuation. The second point is that economic interdependence will be the incentive for cooperation, because while the regional rivalries that we are seeing are attracting most of the attention, economic interdependence continues to create powerful incentives for cooperation. Competition among regional actors is real, and it will likely also remain like that for the geopolitical landscape. But all the actors have an interest in maintaining stable trade routes and predictable economic conditions. And this is especially true for the Red Sea corridor, where trade, logistics, energy flows, infrastructure investments, and port activities connect the GCC countries to the Horn economies, in which many of them have a lot of investments already going on. And so we have the paradox here. Competition persists, but also shared interests. The more economically interconnected regional actors are, the greater the cost of prolonged instability in the region. So I would say economic pragmatism, as we always say, will continue to shape regional dynamics. Of course, competition will not disappear, but economic realities will be the ones that will be encouraging the path toward peace. And the last short point, which I think is the one that I would really like to expand a little bit more on, is of course the private sector, because we cannot leave the private sector out of the security discussion. Of course, we always focus on state, regular diplomacy, military actors, etc. but we don't give enough importance to the private sector. And yet businesses are often among the first to feel the impact of instability in the region. And one interesting observation, actually, from my own experience in banking in Djibouti, which, by the way, Djibouti also hosts one of the largest free zones on the continent. So my observation is that geopolitical uncertainty often becomes visible through economic behavior before it even appears in broader economic indicators. For example, during these periods of heightened regional tension, companies tend to become even more cautious, as Professor Narboni says. Some may delay investment decision, they will reassess commercial transaction, or even seek more additional bank guarantees to manage their risk. For example, we observe also businesses are becoming even more cautious in their trade activities, requesting stronger safeguards before committing to certain international transactions globally or also in the region. And at the same time, financial institutions will strengthen their risk assessments and eventually ask for even more security collaterals from their clients. And I believe all these, extra measures will slow down businesses and economy in general. So these may seem like just technical adjustments, but there are early signs of how geopolitical tensions affect the real economy. And this is why I believe the private sector should be viewed as more than just a beneficiary of stability, because it's clearly one of the most important stakeholders in regional security. Businesses, investors, logistic operators, financial institutions, they all have direct interest in preserving stability because instability carries tangible economic costs. So in the long term, sustainable security in the Red Sea region will require not only diplomatic and security cooperation, but also economic resilience, diversification, as Professor Narboni says, and more meaningful engagement with the private sector. And before I end, I would just like to end with, as we said, the future of the Red Sea region will not be determined only by military balances or geopolitical competition. It will also depend on how regional actors manage their growing economic interdependence. And to go back to the first question, competition will probably likely remain part of the landscape, but shared economic interests eventually will create the incentives for cooperation. And the challenge is to transform shared vulnerabilities into shared opportunities and build a more resilient regional order. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Asma. That's very, very unique, peculiar insights too, especially the private sector and specific impacts that you are observing in Djibouti, beyond the other points that you raised, how competition and cooperation may coexist with all the more securitization that may develop. So we will come back to those points, but thank you so much, Asma, for bringing all those important points. Mahjoub, you have the floor. I have already introduced you earlier, hoping that you'll join us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. My contribution will focus on basically what is happening or what is the ramification of Iran's policies and actions since the 28th of February, and how this will impact, I would say, the other side of Arabian Peninsula, which is the neighboring of African countries, started with Egypt, Sudan, and Djibouti and Somalia and all of those our countries which believe that they are paying a heavy price for all of these conflicts happening around. There are three things we have to look at it when we want to evaluate Iran's actions. Iran perceived this war as an existential war. It's about surviving. It's about remaining on the map as an Islamic Republic of Iran, and all actions are designed based on this understanding. It's not because the feeling that they are weak. It's because they have a feeling, they have a long history, and they know how to manage defeats. And that should be surprising you. Iran, the last 500 years, was defeated more than 4 times militarily. Started with Ottomans in what's so-called Chaldean War, where Safavids were defeated. And after more than 100 days, they signed a treaty with Ottomans. With Russia, they had wars with more than 100 years, and they signed 2 main treaties. And in 1828, they signed a very well-known treaty called Turkmenchai, and they lost 880,000 kilometers square of their lands. And Qajari state at that time considered that a victory. Again, the same thing happened in 1941 when Russia and Great Britain invaded Iran, and they were forced to leave Iran, and then the Iraq War. This is just to understand Iran, Islamic Republic, look at this war with all of this in the background, that the enemies, they never defeat them in a context, they never force the regime to be or forced to achieve regime change. The regimes remained in power. Safavids remained 214 years. Qajaris remained in power after all of those defeats, 98 years. Islamic Republic after Iraq won, they are still in power for nearly now 41 years. So all of this together in the background when they are making decisions now about this war. What makes all of those wars similar, that they are all with superpower of their own time. Ottomans were one of the superpower at that time. Russia at that time were one of the major powers. And now they are fighting the United States with Israel, the most two nuclear powers. So all of this in the background will help you to see that Iran looks at what they have done in the Strait of Hormuz is the minimum to show that they are on control. The use of Strait of Hormuz was a reflection of Iran's understand of power that transferred, conveyed to them through the history. And now they are using this to say to the Americans, look, we can force all across the world to listen to us, and not being able to act and open the Strait of Hormuz. And based on that, they threaten to close Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the fact that they can do it and they can make everyone pays the price. The second element, when Iran decided to close the Strait of Hormuz, it was clear it wasn't a decision of the war at that time. It was a decision made in September 2025. At that time, there was an evaluation by the security apparatus in Iran that they came to the conclusion after rounds of discussion from end of June 2025, which is the end of 12 days war, until September, they came to the conclusion that a second war is coming. By the way, there is a terminology in Iran called forced wars, and they consider the Iran war is the first one, the second one 12 days, and this is the third one. So they were saying a third enforced wars is coming, and that in this scenario, they decided that they will make the cost of this war very highly on everyone, and that was I knew this since October myself as an expert, and I was talking about it. But when they start basically the process in 28th of February, I start hearing about the countries they are start calling ambassadors, and one of the ambassadors, and this is classified information. He told one of the governments in the Gulf that all of those actions, including shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, was made by previous supreme leader, which confirmed the information I had that all decision was made in September 2025. And the reason was clear, is basically making the cost higher to everyone across the globe, and stopping the idea of being a country under sanctions. And I strongly believe the Strait of Hormuz is being shutting down to achieve three things to Iran. One is to end the what's so-called the sanctions. Secondly, to get the money, basically their money abroad, which are around $100 billion. And thirdly, is allowing their oil to go out without any sanctions, which basically 2.4 million a barrel every day. And if they are able to get this or some of this, I don't think so. They will keep the Hormuz closed, but they will maintain one thing: is everyone will not cross the strait unless they coordinate with them. And that is what I think the first thing they will have it. For the future, they will say, if anything happens to them, they will have fees on that. The third element, I think this war, what happened in this part, Israel being involved in that, which is, I strongly believe that was motivated by Israel 100%. I don't think so that the war is happening in the context of Iran-America conflict or crisis of relations. It happens in the context of the ramification of 7th of October. This is part of Israeli strategy to zero their enemies in the region. And the major enemy to them is Iran. And the job will not be accomplished without basically attacking Iran. So based in that, they will the priority, the aim to regime change is still there. However, they will try to do it differently, maybe through economic pressure now. And I think that explains to us why Iran now delaying the negotiations and reaching agreement of memorandum of understanding, because they don't want to go to the 60 days of negotiation unless they got at least $10,000 or $10 billion part of their money back, because they want to go back to their people after this memorandum of understanding with money in hand, saying we have done something, and then having more money. So I would say finally that this conflict, it is in the Strait of Hormuz. Israel is involved in it, but the echoes is happening. Bab al-Mandeb was thrown 3 times that it will be closed if any further action against Iran. And I think still it's on the table. However, I have to remind all of us that Houthis now is no longer 100% controlled by Iran. I think Saudis are getting more closer to Houthis. I think we should look at how this relation will develop between Saudis and Houthis, which I think may lead to Iran may lose Houthis in some stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahbub. I think, Mahjub, this is very, very, again, another interesting layers of analysis, and it gives us also additional lens, especially some of the points you raised about the collective political and social psychology and political and military calculation in Iran, deep inside, emanating from a deep historical experience, and the view that this is seen as not war of choice, but war of survival, existential, and accordingly, the attempt to deploy all assets necessary to execute this war. As we know, Donald Nectarline and others have showed when countries are facing or societies face existential war of survival, they may use all assets necessary, in some cases very devastating assets. So, and this that has been pre-war planned as confidential, as the classified information helps. And the last point you raised about Houthi is also very important. I will come back to that with my own also understanding. But let me give an opportunity to others if there is any comment or question for the participant to raise before I come in with some of the points to emphasize and ask you even to reflect on. Any question, comment from the participants, please do write it on the chat and we will reflect on those. Now, I don't see any comment unless my colleagues Mango or Francesco have received anything.
Not yet. I think please continue.
All right, thank you. And I think there were very, very interesting points about the Houthis. Very interesting, the issue of security umbrella. Both Ahmed and Mahjoub, you raised it about Houthi and Luigi too, but also the security umbrella that Luigi raised and Asma about securitization. More securitization may emerge as an important question. And I think it's Ahmed also who has raised, as well as Luigi, about security may be retaught, reimagined, restructured in many parts of that parts of the world. And also the issue of interesting point that Asma had raised about competition along the interest-based pragmatic relationship and shared interests that will be promoted by many countries, advanced by many countries, will be also an interesting to see. And something that I think Luigi has raised, and I would like us to discuss more, is the impact of this war on the behavior of the states, especially on use of force. Remember, we are facing for some time, in the Middle East now maybe, but previously there were examples in Africa. Clearly, we are seeing that many countries, many leaders are violating, breaking international law on the use of force easily, without consequence. It's becoming in Europe, in the case of Ukraine, in Africa, almost all countries that are in a crisis, about 19 countries are in deep crisis that we see, 19 countries that we see, the use of force without restraint, without constitutional restraint, public moral restraint, ethical restraint, including the use of new technologies that I think Ahmed was raising about drone technology and new AI technology that are being imposed. And the use of force immediately affects freedom of navigation. No question about it. If there is no restraint on the use of force, as provided under the chapter 2 of the UN Charter, which is the cornerstone of the order we talk about after the Second World War, then it affects freedom of navigation, as we see, and geography turns into easily, by the owners of the geography, into choke points. And that becomes an agency, an asset actually, a military asset, to be used, like Mahjoub was saying. And with it, of course, a core aspect for the African side especially, but I think for all civilians everywhere, is the violation of humanitarian law and human rights law, which is part of international law, that has been there. Member countries, almost all states, had acquiescence to it. And in most cases, especially humanitarian law under Geneva Convention and the use of force under the UN Charter are being violated. And there are others that we can add to this list of violation of international law. So if we can talk how it affected the behavior of the state, whether this behavior will be amenable for restructuring, changing actually to more compliance to international law, broadly speaking, is a question that is preoccupying many of us, including myself. So we could talk a little bit on that. The other aspect that was raised is on economic model and also private sector. All of you almost raised, Luigi, Ahmed, and Asma especially, including the private sector. And there was one point that I want to emphasize that is less discussed is migration. Ahmed raised it. And I want to say a few things on that. And this is taking into account that he said there are some signs, maybe temporary, but there are some signs there will be impact. The war's impact will extend to migration trends. As you know, a large portion, the Middle East hosts about 44.1 million migrants, international migrants, according to IOM 2024 report. And about 70% of these, more than 31, are in 6 GCC states. They are top migration destination. The economy model we're talking is dependent actually on migrant talents, labor, which is semi-low and medium skilled, but also high skilled talents are also very important for this. And a significant part of this population are expats or migrants, depending how you see it. Conceptually, there are different. Qatar, about 88%, and Saudi Arabia, close to 60%, and Oman, around 60% also. Now, I believe, and a publication is coming out soon with Henley report, which I am contributing on this topic specifically, the impact. And there are 2 factors that will affect migration trend, in my opinion. One is how long this war will last. And second will be if ceasefire was to be signed, how durable it will be. The 2 factors will be very, very important. And the impact of this one will be also bifurcated, that there will be 2 levels of impact. For low skilled labor, the impact will be limited, if not nil, because it's about differential in wages that they will calculate. Remember, irregular migrants constitute a large portion of this. That's the reason why you have deportation of 700,000 from one country only in 10 years from Saudi. And to Ethiopia alone, in 1 or 2 years, a cumulative 177,000 overstayers or irregular migrants were deported. And then you have also irregular migrations through Yemen. Now, those will not be significantly affected because we know what we call in migration state of exception. Some countries are state of exception, and that regardless of the peace and security situation, state failure even, case, Libya is a case, or Yemen, migrants will continue. The second batch, which is very important, it will be impacted significantly, in my opinion, is the high skilled and investors, hospitality, those that are capable of spending. They have capability, and that they will be affected significantly. And this will be a serious impact on the economic model. Let me stop here. If there is additional comment, I'll come back to the other points that you raised, but I will open it for now on this. Do we have any comment on? No, I don't see on the chat. If there is anyone who wants to reflect on those, what I have said, Luigi, I will reverse now. Asma, if you have initial thoughts, reactions to what I have said and others have said, co-speakers have said, I'll give you the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mihari. I don't have a lot of comments, but I was just thinking about what you said about international law and the implication of, having to respect freedom of navigation, restraining the use of force, and everything that the UN Charter tells us to do. But ever since, let's say maybe with the start of the genocide in Gaza, it feels like the international law is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. And it started even way before with the war in Ukraine. So I was just thinking to myself, like, where are we going from there? Like, sometimes it's very hard to stay positive looking at those things. Yes, we speak about competition and also collaboration, but like when we try to see the path, sometimes it's a bit confusing. So I was just having all these ideas in my head, but I don't have much to add. Thank you very much. It was very insightful listening to everyone's contribution.
Yeah. Mahjoub, do you want to go ahead to give it some reflections on what has been said by others and what I have said earlier?
I just, I think, this war is likely to. I think the war has ended. We are waiting for an official announcement of the end of what I call it the state of the war, which is basically like what happened yesterday of attacking Kuwait, and so everyone will go back to their own, I would say, position pre-28th of February. But I think the fingerprint, the impact of this war is likely to continue for a long time, simply because it brought different elements to the regional security and the stability, and also to the dynamics between governments, how they have to deal with these kind of conflicts. And most importantly, it does raise a huge question mark about the role of the United States in the region, and where is this role is going, how this will affect stability in the region, what is about the security collaborations with the United States. On the point you have raised about the expats, we call them in the Gulf the expats, which a huge number of expats are in different Gulf states, including someone like me. I think the way how you put it was accurate. I mean, those who are skilled. Those basically people, they will be affected. And when they are affected, all other businesses will be affected, because those people who are spending the money, those people who goes to hotels, to restaurants, to all the small business, and then if those people started to be more conservative financially, that will have a great impact on a small business. I would say, with especially now, if there are more policies and actions to, I would say, for spending, to cut spending, to manage spending, that also will raise a lot of concerns. People, they become more worried about spending when these kind of things happen. And then they will review their priorities list. What is a priority, If, for example, one of the major business from the Gulf is traveling, airlines. If now the tickets become expensive, you would expect a huge number of those expats will not travel. And that basically, in one hand, they will stay on where they are, and they spend in those countries. But in the other hand, there will be a huge loss on airlines, which in this time of the year, they get a lot of money because of traveling, and I think the tickets are becoming expensive, and with the issue of fuel is becoming more complicated now. I think you should expect more impact on airlines, especially in the region. The third element here I want to highlight, there is a huge concern about how international community is facing this turmoil or this war. It's not only divided, it is lost. It lost its own tools. If you look at the discourse, if you look at the statements, the world is shattered, is in a very bad situation. And that raises the questions, what if we have a very serious global conflict? What will happen? Where is the United Nations? Where is the other organization? What's happened to the international law? And I think that itself also is making people more worried about the future. Where is the legacy of post-Second World War is going? Are we moving toward end of that and emerging a new system or something? That's also an important issue. And I think it's still the last chapter of this war will tell us about what will happen to the system in Iran, how the system will be, whether the remaining regime in Iran will be capable to contribute to the stability of the region as a whole, or actually playing a negative role.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that and others to respond, especially the last point you raised on the Houthis. And I think Ahmed has pointed out we were surprised the way they approached this. And the surprise had two theories to explain. On the one hand, you would expect that, as usual, they would be proactive, they would react immediately as a proxy of Iran to do whatever they can do on Bab al-Mandab and beyond, and the other side. But this didn't happen. There were pronouncements signaling public PR, but more on the practical aspect, there was no much action. And this surprised many. And there are two theories, I would say two and a half, actually. The first one is that of emerging from Iran's perspective, that this is a strategic calculation, that Iran has a good relation still with Houthi, a good deal of influence on the Houthis, but it doesn't want to overuse its capability. It is reserving it for other times, strategic times, that there is a limit in terms of what ammunitions and missiles, drones, and so on, that this is a strategic move mainly associated actually from Iran to restrain the Houthis to wait. The second is that actually the Houthis are in a strategic survival mode, that they are self-preserving, that they are calculative, that this is in-house domestic from the Houthis, that they didn't want to use their ammunitions, which most of them might have come before from Iran. Now that Iran is overusing that, they will not have access to those kind of capabilities. Now, the third, which is half point, which I don't really subscribe much, actually I subscribe to the second one. The strategic survival was the main calculation from the Houthis, not the first one based on Iran's influence or calculation. The third one, or half, is that the previous war, the previous bombardment and attack on the Houthis has depleted their capability and it has made them to rethink. Perhaps the reason why I said half is related to the second one, the second theory. If you could comment on that, it will be great. For Ahmed, I will give it, and then Luigi and
Can I say something? Just 2 sentences on this.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think Houthis this time, I would say 100%. Your second point, I agree with it 100%, and that is my assessment as well. But I think that I would like to add to that. I just finished a huge study about the source of legitimacy for Houthis. And it will come soon in English. We did survey on the ground. We had interviews. Houthis have problem of legitimacy. They have a problem of discourse formation. They cannot design a discourse. They are not Zaydis. They are not 12 Imam Shia school. They are not Shafi'i. They have an issues with that, with identity politics. And the third thing, I think, I would say this chapter of this war has nothing to deal with Gaza, with Palestine, which can help Houthis to gain more legitimacy. It's about helping Iran. And here, considering what happened in Yemen, they lost. Houthis now, the Houthis now control around 33% of the lands in Yemen. Previously, they used to control more than 65%. So the limitation, the geographic limitation, the economic limitations, and more importantly, the consequence of current war may not empower them rather than actually weaken them. So that is the reason I think they decided to step aside and just monitor, because I think one of the calculation was if they close the Bab al-Mandeb, they may have a military attacks which can basically wipe them off the map, as someone describes the situation. I think they have interest to remain and stay on the.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mahjoub. I think that's very important. Maybe Ahmed, you want to come in, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, and it's good to see you, Mahjoub. The two things I wanted to just bring out, and I agree on the end of the war, the status of the war, if you will, but it's not an ending in of itself. I think we will continue, as most conflicts in the region and elsewhere, continue to be this in this lull moment, where it's more of a conflict management and containment rather than conflict resolution per se. I think none of the conflicts that we have seen, from Libya to Yemen to even Syria or in Somalia, none of this have been resolved into an actual post-war kind of strategy and conflict resolution, peacemaking, peace building, and so on. I think we are living in an age today that it's conflict management at best. Containment, it would be great that the actions, the war, the atrocities do not go from one border or to across to another border. And I think part of this problem is earlier the comment on international law, the lack of any norms that have been completely shattered. I think Gaza and the genocide was the final nail in the coffin, I think. You cannot think of anything else that could come after that, and you expect the world to kind of change course. So I think part of why we are in this very, very difficult situation, where those actors that should be actually intervening, whether on a multilateral level or bilateral or as a power, are not intervening anymore to try and actually resolve issues. In fact, they are keeping simmering, keeping the pot on the stove in a very low heat, so it doesn't boil, it doesn't spill, it doesn't go anywhere, partially because they are unable to resolve what they have started. And the other side of this is that some of those actors, as Mahjoub have mentioned, think of themselves and their survival as the means to the end. So for them, they need to maintain the survival. They need to show that they can actually create chaos, they can create havoc, whether it's Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz or some other group that's deciding to do something else across borders or impact energy or maritime security. The other point that is important to bring into the conversation is that we briefly talked about the economic impact. And then you mentioned, Mehari, Gulf. We talked earlier about quickly how the Gulf would be impacted, some of the questions about the short and medium term kind of rethinking about the Gulf economic model. But I think we haven't yet seen the impact of this war across the world. I think it's taking longer than people expected to see the inflation prices, to see gas prices and oil prices impacting produce and products. So I think we haven't yet seen the full cycle. It takes a while to show up. And I think it will be really, really problematic if there haven't been any serious messaging soon about these end of hostilities, end of war kind of statement that kind of temper the expectations of a worsening economic positioning. And I think this will impact heavily a lot of countries in Africa that are dependent on oil, that are dependent on products that are being shipped to its shores or cross borders. I think we will see this to some extent in the United States, a country that inflation is not easy to come down, and actually it can stay up for a while. And we will see this maybe somewhere else in Asia, but we're yet to see where these consequences will be felt. So I wouldn't really, I'm not trying to alarm everyone, but I'm just trying to be more cautious in terms of how we think of the consequences and how we should also think that some of these are not going to show up now. They will take a little bit time to be more evident. And finally, if anything, this decision by Iran to use the Strait of Hormuz as a card to cripple navigation and energy and all of this maritime in this choke point, I think it's bringing us all into this broader sense that to show how the Strait of Hormuz is basically connected to the Suez Canal and back. Whether or not you like it, it's actually connected. And there has to be other ways and means of thinking about these choke points and think really collectively about these interconnected, interdependent relationships. The world is no longer able to work with one hegemon or one power or one economic power. Still, China, even if it's the biggest or soon to be one of the biggest or surpass the United States, its manufacturing products requires and depends on the free and secure navigation around the world and access to ports. So China in of itself actually depend on that measure very, very heavily. And I think it's going to be interesting and important to think about how others are thinking about it, including some of the jokes about the Malacca Strait by some of the senior officials in Malaysia or Indonesia or others that discussed why don't we just control this strait and start putting controls on it.
Yeah, indeed. I think it has become clear example, instructional example for some to think that geography and choke points could turn into a big leverage and agency. I think this will continue. Bab al-Mandab itself will be an issue for.
Just a quick note.
A quick note.
Yeah. I was writing recently something about something called weaponization of tools, political tools, and I started actually with this kind of observation. The United States is the first country started to weaponize the tools by using the SWIFT code, the dollar, the other things to sanction countries, and then which led to failed or to collapse many of the governments across the globe, or weaken them, taking them to the stage of falling. And I was comparing what Iran is doing. Iran is doing the same, by the way. Does the same. Iran is actually weaponized the Strait of Hormuz, and every country can do this in the future, unfortunately, because if they found themselves under, I would say, threat, and they don't have nuclear or weapon or another weapons can defend themselves, they may use it. And the weaponization is very dangerous.
That's the reason why the role of international law is going to be very central. That coming back to international law will be important, especially the use of force and freedom of navigation and international humanitarian law and human rights law. Luigi, you have the final words. You can keep us until the evening, midnight, if you wish, but I give it to you.
I know we need to close, but just a few remarks on
Yeah.
along the lines of what both Mahjoub and Ahmed have said in terms of um, uh, course that the international or incapacity that of the international community to act and to put an end to what negative trends have started, the conflicts and so forth. It is obvious that what we are witnessing is a gradual dismantlement of all traditional tools, if not the very same weaponization of some of them, the tools that were instrumental for the international so-called international liberal system, for the international global economy to function. Now they are being weaponized and the use of coercion has replaced the attempt to use ways to mitigate and smoothen and resolve conflicts and issues. So what it's clear that as long as the major actors, including the middle powers, believe that this is the only course of action that can help their survival or can improve their positioning, I'm afraid that this is the mimic in international system will replicate or deepen or amplify some attitudes. And that brings me to the issue, I mean, of the region. I mean, obviously, we are witnessing in the Middle East and in the broader Middle East, which includes the Red Sea area and part of the Mediterranean, the North Africa. We are witnessing a particularly it's the core of these pilot experimentations of the dismantling of the system and replacing it with reckless use of force, unmitigated use of vulnerabilities and choke points, etc. It is obvious that on the one hand, neither the superpower, the US, is neither willing nor interested in trying to mitigate this. It's maybe we can also discuss it's a force to amplify some of these disruptions. The other major players like China or Russia do not seem interested or willing to play this role, and Europe is unfortunately nowhere to be seen in trying to defend some of these systemic questions, including the application of international law, international humanitarian law, unfortunately in the region. So, barring a change of course that may still be the consequence of the negative trends and dynamics we have seen. I mean, countries may decide, I mean, including Gulf countries, may review their calculation and come to the conclusion that, including Iran, perhaps that the race to the bottom doesn't improve their standing, doesn't bring prosperity, doesn't increase the economic opportunities. So perhaps there are other ways of looking at regional securities. I always mention the Helsinki model in Europe, where the issue of security was looked at from a collecting standpoint, not an exclusionary alliance creation of forming blocks or projecting geopolitical interest in a coercive manner, but trying to look at ways in which convergence can be fostered and legitimate security concerns of every parties can be gradually be met, and the system can create the conditions for then providing mechanisms and institutions, perhaps for conflict resolutions, for addressing issues related to economic prosperity, economic integration, and so forth. This is something that the region has never tried. It has been flagged many times, but has not been tested. I think it takes perhaps being on the brink of the catastrophe to perhaps to reconsider certain course of actions. And that is my hope, that out of this war, rather than simply going into a no war, no peace state that leads to a next war in a few months or a few years, the countries in the region, helped by Europe, helped by all great powers that want to play a useful role, try to move into this direction. And this is perhaps what we as researchers and academics should try to push for. So, thank you.
No, thank you so much. That is an excellent intervention to conclude our event today. And I agree completely. All new approaches, additional approaches has to be tried. Bold proposals has to be pushed, as we did in our ebook that all the speakers have contributed. That was the idea, actually, to bring a new novel approach to this, a conversation on both sides, experts and practitioners of both sides of the Red Sea and Gulf of Eden, but at the same time to come up with new proposals. And I think what you have said makes a lot of sense. And I would say also, given that we hope this war will end immediately, in case it ends up like other wars, that the post-war is not going to be easily achieved, and where you have no peace, no war, or negative peace, then the challenge remains for thinkers to come up with some ideas, and also for policymakers and politicians to consider and lead accordingly. But for today, I think we end our session here. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all participants who joined us today, and also our speakers, all speakers, and my colleagues who are behind these webinars, including Mengo Shorestrain from Pan-African Agenda Institute, and also Francesco from Mediterranean Platform, and other colleagues, Malak, who has been in communication with all of you. And thank you. We'll meet next
Thank you so much
month on another topic. Thank you.